I didn't start Schedule 1 trying to build an empire. I was trying to survive. I had no money, no products, and no contacts. I was a nobody. But of course, greatness doesn't come to you overnight. It needs to be built, brick by brick. And let me tell you, we had a lot of bricks. But before we get to that, we have to remember where this all began. The caravan, our place of operation, and sadly, also our place of residence. It was a little cramped, but it was all mine. Times were tough. At this point in my life, I wasn't a street pharmacist. I was a garbage man. Cash for trash. That's how I managed to scrape by day to day. And with what little earnings I made, I invested them straight into the business. I had just enough room in the van for 2 medicinal herb gardens where I would grow my medicine and prescribe them to my patients. But there lied my first problem. Who are my patients? Does anybody know who I am? Does anybody even know I exist? In Kyle, we trust, my first customer. And once Kyle came through, word started to spread. Quietly at first, whispers carried through the wind, and maybe even a rumor or two. Names said just loud enough for it to reach the wrong ears. So I did what any respectable street pharmacist would do. I offered free samples. But it turns out, when you deal with me, free samples aren't exactly free. My hands had a habit of wandering, slithering into pockets. Taking donations people didn't realize they were making. But what could they do? They couldn't call the cops to say that their dealer who was selling them illegal substances was also stealing from them. Turns out this is 100% what they would do. The deals started rolling in. Business was booming. For some people, 4 AM was the end of their day. For me, it was just getting started. The curfew couldn't keep me off the streets. Those late night bonuses made the risk worth it. But selling alone wasn't enough for me. I wanted double, no, triple the profits. So the strategy was simple. Rob them before the deal, make the sale, then rob the product back after the deal. It was efficient, maybe a little ruthless, but you can't deny it was beautiful. The best part, everyone came crawling back the next day as if nothing happened. Life was good. Until people got smarter. Hidden pockets, no cash, nothing to steal. Suddenly I had to be legitimate, and that was not a good look. Especially when I kept running out of product before I could even reach all my patients. Demand was high, supply was low, and our reputation questionable at best. When my buyback scheme failed, things got a little messy. Let's just say the Yankees might give me a call with all these home runs I've been hitting with my trusty bat. It wasn't pretty, but it kept the people quiet, and in my line of work, silence is good for business. For the first few days, this was a cycle, and somehow we were pulling around $1,000 a day. But just when things started to feel stable, it all blew up in my face. The caravan was gone. All that remained was a note. Watch yourself. Signed by TB. I always knew tuberculosis was deadly. With our base of operations destroyed, we had no chance but to move up in the world, which in this case meant a motel. It wasn't glamorous, but it had walls, a roof, some pre-existing trash, but it had a significantly lower amount of explosions. I think we can take that as a win. We regrouped and started round 2 of our empire. Times were tough. I had resorted to taking what little change people had in their pockets. Then Mrs. Ming came in with an offer I couldn't refuse. She had an upstairs space that she was willing to part with. It had just enough sunlight coming in to grow a garden, and that's all I needed to know. I couldn't pass up this deal, so I forked over the loose change I found off the streets, and our empire expanded. It ain't much, but it was ours. After furnishing our newly purchased property, it was time to start growing again. And for the first time, we ended the day with excess product. This meant one thing, it was time to grow. I shouldn't need to do all the peasant work around here, so I hired help. How helpful they are, time will tell. Benji was our first dealer. He took care of anyone that tried to meet up with me outside the barbershop. And George became our botanist, a name I will never forget. With all these extra hands, it was time I upgraded the packing station. Why sell one bag at a time when I can force people to buy a jar of 5 instead? Bulk sales equals better value. Well, better value for me, that is. And just like that, greed crept in. Deals started falling through. People didn't trust us. Turns out beating your customers unconscious doesn't do wonders for brand loyalty, so I had to change. I would no longer rob customers before the deals. After the deals though, well, let's just say old habits die hard. That's when Mr. Tuberculosis reached out. He wanted to meet, and when someone with an army asks for a meeting, you attend. The offer was simple: sell wholesale to him or don't live long enough to regret it. And well, I kinda like living. So a deal was struck, and just like that, we were working alongside the Benzies crew. Thanks to this deal, I needed to make more money from my customers to offset the loss I would make with the Benzies. So it was time for a new strain. The OG was great to start off with, but if I'm being honest, it was below us now. The time for the green crack era starts now. And with new products, we needed new people to sell to. Westville looked ripe for the taking. We started to introduce ourselves to the local residents there and made the acquaintance of Molly. She became our second dealer and would rule Westville while we did some very important boss things. Boss things meaning making some very bad financial decisions. We bought the bungalow and now I only had $50 left in my pockets. I didn't want to file for bankruptcy this quickly, so I had to do the unthinkable: charge even more for my produce. And it turns out the customers weren't exactly thrilled. Failed transactions left, right and centre. I felt like I was never going to be able to financially recover from this. I had to swallow my pride and only upsell by 50%. Times were very tough. We were only making around 5k per day. In this economy, that's chump change. But it at least let me get a start on the meth lab. The bungalow had been decked out and meth was finally in production. With even more products to sell, we needed to find more customers, but unfortunately our deal with the Benzies stopped us from making new friends. And as if it was a sign from a greater power, Benzie called for some wholesale items. It was for sour diesel, something we didn't even make. Some might say this deal is turning sour. It was time to cut ties. Desperate times calls for desperate measures. With the cartel on our bad side, I had to keep 2 eyes forward and 2 eyes on my back. And I wasn't blessed with 4 eyes. Things are going to start to get dangerous. And just like that, I get a text from Molly. She was ambushed. The streets are no longer safe. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Always stay strapped. I had to give my dealers extended leave until each region was safe from the Benzies. Now that meant a lot more work for me, but it also means I no longer have to give my dealers their cut. That means I had more capital to work with, which I think in business terms means more cash money. And we do like cash money. With these extra funds, I managed to purchase the Stash and Dash as my secondary meth lab, and slowly more regions were opening up to me. First it was the downtown region, then the docks, then suburbia. With all these new customers, we needed to bump up our production yet again. And that's when the barn called to me, a full farm to maximize our green crack distribution line. We were going to be raking in the big loads, or so I thought. Little did I know, there were some internal conflicts happening within my own organisation. It all started from George. Word on the street was he was thinking of unionising, and we can't have that. And like any good boss, I had a strong word with George to push any of those thoughts out of his mind. But it didn't work. My workers went on strike. No one mixing my medicine, no one drying the leaves. It was all a disaster. Who would have thought my biggest problem wasn't the cartel, it was my own employee. I was losing respect, and I couldn't have that, so I spoke in words that they would all understand. Free lunch to all my employees. What's on the menu? Knuckle sandwiches. All got a high five to the face, and ever since then, we were golden. It's true, actions speak louder than words. Violence wasn't the problem, it was the answer. And now we can point our focus on what really mattered, getting rid of the cartel. For far too long they have been a thorn in my side, and that's when I got to thinking, if there are no cartel members, then we'd have no cartel issues. The answer was right in front of my face all along. I started off by getting rid of any cartel members I saw, but it wasn't enough. If I wanted them gone for good, I needed to start from the top. Thomas Benzie needed to disappear. But what could we do to get rid of Big TB? Of course the answer was simple. Do to him what he did to my caravan. Some might call it poetic justice. But now that means we needed an explosive device big enough to level the manor. Sam had a way with tools, and by making his pockets a little heavier, he managed to dig a tunnel right under the manor. Next, we needed the explosives. The yellow jumpsuit man was the guy for that, though it wasn't free. Billy wanted a key of our finest white, which was awkward considering I'd never made coke before, so I learned fast. We purchased the warehouse at the docks and turned it into our new coke operation. Our first brick had Billy's name all over it. Now that we had the explosive, we needed a way to blow it up without blowing me up with it. Our local arms dealer Stan was the man. In exchange for silencing a thief that constantly steals from his supplies, he would help put a timer on the bomb. So at the crack of night, we kept our ears on the streets and found the rat. The rodent was exterminated and the clocks were set. It was time. Tonight's the night. I planted the TNT and walked away calmly. Cool guys don't look at explosions. Everything went up in smoke. Chaos in the streets as all the crackheads were losing their minds. Naturally, I was there for moral support to help calm their nerves. With the Benzies gone, the city was mine. Dealers were called back onto duty and production was back on track. I was suffering from success. I was making more money than I could ever launder. To add further insult to the Benzies, I ended up buying his manor and turning it into my second coke farm. At this point, I wasn't running an operation, the operation was running itself. Employees handled production, I handled re-ups by day and VIP deals by night. Money laundered for investments, and eventually I ran out of things to buy. Not even the cops could touch me anymore. 100 days into this wild adventure, and we had millions in our pockets, all businesses purchased and all locations running at peak efficiency. I was the king of Hyland Point. I didn't start Schedule 1 trying to build an empire, but somehow along the way, I accidentally became the biggest street pharmacist in the city. My name is Billy Blanco, and this is my farm.